standing behind the transparent glass on the 60th floor of the Sterling Technology Tower. Victor held everything the world desired: a multi-billion-dollar tech empire, fame, and absolute power. Yet, whenever dusk fell, the shadows did not stretch across the skyscrapers, but instead completely enveloped his soul. It had been 3 years since Evelyn, the wife he loved more than his own life, passed away in a tragic car accident. She took the light of their home with her, leaving him a massive fortune and a wound that would never heal: little Mia. Mia was turning 5 this year, an age where she should have been chirping like a little bird. But ever since the fateful night that took her mother, the little girl had developed selective mutism. The child refused to communicate with the world through sound. She only withdrew into a corner, clutching a handkerchief embroidered with her mother's name, and communicated through scribbled crayon drawings. Victor had hired the best doctors, bought the most expensive toys, and even canceled dozens of board meetings just to sit and mold clay with his daughter. But all his efforts were like a drop in the ocean. Mia's eyes were always empty and lifeless, looking right through him into a void. The gnawing helplessness in a father's heart made Victor collapse at his desk many nights. Then, Elena appeared. They met at a charity gala, raising funds for orphan children. Elena was unlike any woman in the high society Victor had known. She didn't drape herself in ostentatious jewelry, nor did she wear a cold, socialite smile. As a child psychologist and a philanthropic activist, Elena appeared in a simple white silk dress, her brown hair flowing, her deep eyes full of empathy. The first day Victor brought Elena home to introduce her, a miracle seemed to happen. Elena gently knelt on the rug, not forcing Mia to look at her. She slowly picked up a crayon, drew a sunflower on a blank piece of paper, and said softly, "Hello there. This flower is sad because it misses the sun. Can you help me color it in?" That was the first time in 3 years Victor saw his daughter slightly budge. Mia's tiny, trembling hand took the yellow crayon. Victor's heart burst in that moment. He looked at Elena, feeling as though he were looking at an angel sent down to save him and his daughter. Elena's tenderness, calmness, and profound psychological knowledge made Victor trust her absolutely. He blindly rushed into love, believing that finally, Mia was about to have a mother again, and their cold house would ring with laughter once more. The days that followed were a soothing melody, at least when Victor was present. But reality often wore a different face once the front door closed. One Tuesday morning, after Victor kissed Mia's forehead and put on his suit jacket to leave for a crucial shareholder meeting, the warm atmosphere in the villa instantly froze. The moment the engine of Victor's Rolls-Royce disappeared behind the iron gates, the gentle smile on Elena's lips vanished. She slammed a magazine onto the glass table with an ear-piercing smack, glaring coldly at the corner of the room where Clara, the loyal nanny who had cared for Mia since birth, was tidying up toys. "What the hell are you doing with those Legos?" Elena's voice held no sweetness. Instead, it was a grinding hiss through gritted teeth. "How many times have I told you to sort them by color? Are you lazy, or do you just lack the brain to understand basic rules in this house?" Clara startled, hastily bowing her head. "I'm sorry, Miss Elena. Mia just wanted to build a multicolored castle, so I was going to." "Don't use that child as a shield for your stupidity." Elena marched over, gripping Clara's wrist tightly, her red-painted nails digging into the older woman's skin. "Remember this well. After the wedding next month, I will be the true mistress here. Cross me, and you'll lose your job, and I'll make sure your work visa is canceled immediately. Is that clear?" Clara bit her lip, holding back tears of humiliation, and nodded silently. In a hidden corner behind an ajar door, little Mia stood clutching her mother's handkerchief. The little girl's wide eyes witnessed the entire scene. Her tiny hands trembled violently, and Mia backed away in fear, accidentally dropping her box of crayons onto the floor. "Here Hearing the noise, Elena snapped her head around. Her face hardened like a cracked mask. She walked briskly toward Mia, with zero intent to comfort her. Gripping the frail child's shoulders, Elena hissed, "Draw, and draw. Can't you open your mouth and speak a single sentence like a normal person? You sick, deaf-mute brat." That afternoon, when Victor returned home with a small gift hidden behind his back, Mia didn't run out to greet him, as she usually did. A terrifying silence engulfed the house. After a frantic search, he found his daughter huddled deep in a dark closet, sweating profusely, breathing in panicked gasps. Victor painfully embraced his child, his voice trembling. "Mia, what's wrong? What happened?" Just then, Elena stepped gently into the room. Her face showed profound distress, tears welling in her eyes. She knelt beside Victor, placed a warm hand on his shoulder and sighed. "Darling, don't panic." This afternoon she showed signs of psychological regression. When I tried to establish some basic disciplinary boundaries to help her become independent, she got scared and hid in here. As a professional, I must be honest, we have spoiled Mia too much. Her mutism is sometimes a way to manipulate adults, to avoid responsibility. If we keep giving in, she'll be trapped in this world forever. Those psychological terms, delivered in Elena's rational, yet deeply sympathetic tone, acted like an anesthetic on Victor's reason. He looked at his trembling daughter, then at the woman shedding tears out of worry for his child. A father's guilt over being unable to heal his daughter clouded his judgment. Victor let out a heavy sigh, nodded in agreement with Elena, and held Mia tight, completely unaware that he was indirectly pushing his daughter into a much deeper nightmare. Ever since the day she hid in the closet, Mia became even more withdrawn. Contrary to Victor's expectations of a gradual integration, as Elena had promised, the little girl outright refused to eat if Elena was at the same table. Instead, Mia spent hours every night huddled on the fleece rug, frantically scrubbing crayons onto blank paper. Late one night, when Victor stopped by his daughter's room to tuck her in, he stepped on a crumpled drawing on the floor. Under the dim yellow nightlight, the image struck his eyes and sent a sudden chill down his spine. It wasn't a naive doodle of shapes or sunny houses that kids usually draw. Instead, the picture was filled with harsh, contrasting colors. In the center was a woman in a white dress, but her face was split in two. One half smiled gently, with a fake halo above her head. The other half was a demon with blazing red skin, pitch-black eyes without pupils, and sharp fangs. Beneath the sharp heel of that red demon was a tiny, gray-feathered bird, being stomped on so brutally that streaks of red crayon splattered everywhere, looking like blood bleeding from the paper. Stunned, Victor tore through the pile of scrap paper on Mia's desk. There wasn't just one, but dozens of similar drawings. The red demon lurked everywhere, behind doors, under the bed, always pointing sharp claws at the little bird. "What are you looking at?" A soft voice called out from the doorway. Elena walked in, holding a glass of warm milk. Seeing Victor's pale face and the drawings in his hand, she frowned slightly, but quickly shifted her expression to one of deeply empathetic sorrow. "These things. What is Mia drawing?" "Elena," Victor stammered, an overwhelming sense of dread rising in his chest. "Is she trying to tell me something?" Elena set the milk down, walked over, and hugged Victor from behind. She sighed a sigh full of professional responsibility. "Honey, in child psychology, this is called projection. When a child loses her mother too early, they often develop an attachment syndrome to their father. My arrival, a new woman, subconsciously makes me an invader in Mia's mind." She pointed at the red demon in the drawing, explaining in a monotone yet hypnotic voice. "She's drawing herself as the pitiful bullied bird and turning me into a two-faced demon to rationalize her hatred. She wants you to feel guilty. She wants you to kick me out." If we yield and play into these delusions, Mia's condition will devolve into paranoid jealousy. We have to be strong, Victor. Elena's highly professional analysis once again struck down the father's intuition. Victor looked at his sleeping daughter, then at the woman willingly bearing the role of the villain for his child's future. He nodded, crumpled the drawings, and threw them in the trash. He chose to believe in adult logic, ignoring the silent, bleeding screams on his daughter's paper. Though Victor was blinded, not everyone in the Sterling family was easily fooled. Sarah, Victor's older sister, was a sharp, straightforward businesswoman who harbored a fiercely protective love for her niece Mia after her sister-in-law's passing. Sarah never had a prejudice against Elena, but the intuition of an experienced woman made her sense something forced behind that perfect smile. That suspicion finally exploded one free afternoon when Sarah used her spare key to drop by her brother's house, unannounced. The moment she stepped down the hallway toward the kitchen, Sarah froze at the sound of a chilling hiss. Through a crack in the door, she saw Elena digging her nails into Nanny Clara's sleeve, leaving angry, red marks on the poor woman's skin. In the corner of the kitchen, little Mia was backing up against the wall, her eyes wide with terror, her hands covering her ears. "If you break this plate, you'll pay for it with your entire month's salary. And you little brat, what are you looking at? Do you think your dad can save you?" Elena growled, her face twisted in cruelty. "What the hell are you doing in my brother's house?" Sarah kicked the door open and shouted. She rushed over to embrace Mia, glaring at Elena with fiery eyes. Contrary to Sarah's expectation of panic, it took Elena exactly 2 seconds to completely flip the script. The demonic face vanished. She let go of Clara, stumbled backward, her eyes instantly welling with tears, and her shoulders trembling like a wounded little animal. Right at that moment, Victor walked into the house, drawn by the yelling. "What's going on, Sarah? What are you doing here?" Victor looked around in confusion. "Victor, you're just in time. I just caught this woman abusing Clara and threatening your daughter." Sarah pointed straight at Elena's face, her voice filled with outrage. But before Sarah could say another word, Elena burst into heavy sobs. She collapsed onto the floor, clutching her chest, executing a perfect theatrical performance. "Victor, I don't understand," Elena hiccuped. "Clara just dropped an expensive porcelain plate right next to Mia's feet. I panicked and pulled her away so the shards wouldn't hit the child. I raised my voice because I was so worried about Mia. But Sarah walked in and just started screaming at me. She called me a liar, a usurper trying to steal Evelyn's place." "I never said that. She's making this up, Clara. Tell Victor the truth." Sarah turned to the nanny. But Clara, remembering the threat of losing her visa and her job, just kept her head bowed, tears streaming down her face, not daring to utter a word. Clara's silence was a fatal blow. In Victor's eyes at that moment, the scene consisted of broken shards, his weeping, wronged fiancée, and his sister, who always had an overbearing personality, throwing a fit. Psychologically manipulated to the point of exhaustion, Victor stepped forward to help Elena up, shielding her behind his back. He looked at Sarah with cold eyes. "Sarah, that's enough. You've always held a grudge against any woman who came after Eva. You're letting your bitterness destroy my new happiness. Please, from now on, do not interfere in my family's internal affairs." "You're crazy, Victor. You're inviting a monster into your home." Sarah screamed in despair. But the door slammed shut in her face. With a flawless act, Elena had successfully severed little Mia and the nanny's final lifeline. Now, inside that luxurious villa, the darkness had truly swallowed the vulnerable, setting the stage for an upcoming wedding steeped in tears. For a child carrying as deep a trauma as Mia, the silk handkerchief embroidered with her late mother Evelyn's name wasn't just a piece of fabric. It was the embodiment of warmth, the only thing left in the world that retained her mother's familiar lily of the valley scent. Mia never let the handkerchief out of her sight. She held it while eating and buried her face in it every night so she could fall asleep without being besieged by nightmares. Just 3 days before the wedding, on a rainy night, the entire Sterling mansion was awakened by choke, broken screams echoing from Mia's room. Victor leaped out of bed, threw the door open, and ran into his daughter's room. On the small bed, Mia was frantically tearing through her blankets and pillows. Her face was streaked with tears, her tiny hands violently tossing stuffed animals onto the floor. She couldn't form words, only letting out heartbreaking, desperate hiccups, her panicked eyes pleading with her father for help. "Mia, what is it, sweetie? What are you looking for?" Victor knelt down, trying to hold her, but she struggled fiercely. Nanny Clara rushed in, her face pale. "Sir, Madame Evelyn's handkerchief. The one Mia always holds. It's gone, I swear. Before she went to sleep tonight, I put it right on her pillow." Victor frowned and immediately joined Clara in searching every nook and cranny of the room. As the air grew thick with panic, Elena walked in. Unlike her usual groggy state, she looked remarkably awake. "What's all this noise about?" Elena asked, her tone laced with annoyance. Then, as if suddenly remembering something, she walked straight toward Clara's personal bag, resting on a small sofa in the corner. Without a word, Elena unzipped the bag, reached in, and pulled out a white object. It was Evelyn's silk handkerchief, but cruelly, the delicate lace edging had been raggedly cut and torn, stained with inexplicable dirt. "Oh my God!" Elena feigned, covering her mouth, shooting Clara a stare as sharp as a knife. "Clara, I know you're often tight on money, but I never expected you'd dare steal the late Madame's gold-threaded handkerchief to sell. And when you realized it wasn't worth anything, you just threw it in your bag with such disdain." "No, it wasn't me." Clara dropped to her knees, tears pouring down. "I swear to God, I would never do that. It was her. She came into the room when I went to get water." "Enough," Victor roared, cutting Clara off. The pressure of being a CEO right before his wedding, compounded by the exhaustion of seeing his daughter in a panic, stripped away his last shred of clarity. Seeing the handkerchief, his wife's keepsake, crumpled in the nanny's bag, Victor pointed at the door. "Clara, I have tolerated you for too long. Stealing and destroying Evelyn's belongings. Tomorrow, pack your things and leave." Hearing her father's shout, Mia rushed over. The frail, weak little girl used her tiny body to shield Clara. Her little hands gripped the fabric of Victor's suit trousers tightly. Mia looked up at her father, her swollen eyes frantically shaking her head, hot tears falling steadily onto his feet. Even though no sound came out, her eyes were screaming, "It wasn't her, Daddy. Please don't send her away." Victor's heart felt as if it were being squeezed. The internal turmoil suffocated him. He looked at his trembling daughter, then at the nanny who had been utterly devoted for the past 5 years. Finally, Victor buried his face in his hands, sighed, and lowered his voice. "Clara, you can stay until the wedding is over. After that, we will terminate your contract." Standing behind them, Elena's lips curled into a triumphant, cruel smirk. She had successfully stolen a child's smile, trampled on the most sacred keepsake, and prepared to throw out the final obstacle. The despair in this house was now completely under her heel. The big day finally arrived. The Sterling mansion was transformed into a veritable palace. The brilliant autumn sunlight reflected off pristine white silk ribbons, and tens of thousands of jade roses imported directly from France, blanketing the aisle leading to the grand fountain, where the vow exchange would take place. Inside the VIP dressing room, Elena sat before a large mirror. The custom-made satin silk wedding dress hugged her flawless curves, enhancing her haughty, magnificent beauty like a goddess. She lightly stroked the massive diamond on her ring finger, smugly admiring her handiwork. In just a few hours, the marriage certificate would make her the true queen of the Sterling Empire. Every obstacle, from the mute daughter to the nosy sister and the lowly nanny, had been swept away. In another room, Victor stood adjusting the bow tie on his tuxedo. Despite wearing the most expensive formalwear, streaks of exhaustion lined his eyes. The image of little Mia's desperate eyes last night kept haunting him. This morning, Mia had refused to wear her bridesmaid dress. She just curled up in the corner of her room, clutching the torn scraps of the handkerchief, her eyes blank and detached from the world. For the first time, Victor wondered, will this wedding truly bring the happiness I believed it would? While undercurrents surged within the main characters, outside on the grounds, another storm was quietly being set up without anyone's knowledge. Wanting to capture the most artistic moments, Victor had hired the country's top B-roll documentary film crew. The director of photography, James, famous for his fly-on-the-wall style, had ordered his team to scatter equipment everywhere. "Listen up, boys," James clapped his hands, directing them. Billionaire Sterling doesn't want a dry, staged wedding video. He wants raw emotion. Activate all the drones. Most importantly, hide the micro-button cameras and highly sensitive microphones inside the rose arrangements along the hallways and near the altar. I want to capture the truest whispers and tears when people think they aren't being filmed. The tiny LED lights on the state-of-the-art equipment blinked red before fading into the leaves and petals. No one in the mansion, not even the security team or Victor himself, knew the exact locations of these hidden cameras. They silently recorded everything, like the invisible, judging eyes of fate. Guests began to arrive. Supercars lined up to turn into the grand gates. Melodious symphony music played. The atmosphere was so glamorous and perfect it was overwhelming. However, Elena had no idea that her habit of unmasking in quiet, deserted corners was about to collide with a lens that never lied. A technological trap had inadvertently been set, just waiting for the demon to walk in. There were exactly 15 minutes left until the ceremony. The symphony orchestra by the fountain began playing the first notes of canon in D. Guests had taken their seats on white silk-covered chairs, the murmur of conversation blending with the clinking of champagne glasses. In the secluded West Corridor, reserved exclusively for service staff, Nanny Clara was trembling as she held little Mia's hand. She planned to take the child to the back garden to escape the stifling atmosphere and the pitying stares of the guests. Mia, wearing a simple gray dress, timidly followed, clutching her sketchbook and a few crayons. Suddenly, the cold clicking of heels echoed. From around the corner, Elena appeared. Her spectacular wedding dress swept across the marble floor, but the face she wore was no longer the smile of an angel. It was contorted cold and radiating malice. "Where do you think you two are sneaking off to, you trash?" Elena hissed, stepping quickly to block their path. Clara jumped, hurriedly pushing Mia behind her back to protect her. "Miss Elena, I was just taking her outside for some fresh air. We won't disturb the wedding." "My wedding, my rules," Elena growled, lunging forward to squeeze the older nanny's jaw, forcing her to look straight into her eyes. "Listen closely, you lowly old hag. The moment the pastor speaks and I say, 'I do,' you are officially kicked out of this house. I will make sure your visa is revoked, and you'll never find another job in this country." Mia stood behind Clara, her large eyes wide with terror. Her tiny hands clumsily opened the sketchbook, holding up a half-finished drawing. In the picture was still the blazing red demon, but this time, its massive mouth was open wide, as if trying to swallow the entire house. Elena let go of Clara's jaw and snapped her head toward the child. Her eyes flashed with chilling cruelty. She snatched the drawing right out of Mia's hands. "This garbage again," Elena sneered, bending down to eye level with the 5-year-old. "Do you think drawing this nonsense will make your dad believe you? Listen to me, you little brat. Your dad would rather believe me than a sick, deaf-mute thing like you. Your mother is dead, and soon enough, you'll be shipped off to boarding school. Welcome to hell, little princess." With that, Elena ripped the drawing into dozens of tiny pieces and threw them right in Mia's face. The child stood paralyzed, tears streaming down in rivers, but unable to force out a single sob. Elena smirked in satisfaction, turned on her heel, and walked away, leaving two miserable souls drowning in despair. But Elena, in all her smugness, failed to notice one thing. Right where she had stood mocking and threatening them, tight against the wall, was a massive arrangement of French roses. Hidden deep within those dark red petals, the micro-LED light of a B-roll camera was blinking steadily. The highly sensitive directional microphone had flawlessly captured every breath, every hiss, and the cruel sound of tearing paper. Inside the mobile control center, parked behind the estate, James the DP was sipping coffee, his eyes constantly scanning the 12 live monitor feeds. He was looking for a natural moment of the bride before she walked down the aisle to insert into the highlight reel. He clicked over to camera 7, West Corridor. Instantly, the coffee cup slipped from James's hand and shattered on the floor. The crisp 4K monitor broadcast every brutal grab of the jaw, every venomous curse slapped into a 5-year-old's face, and the demonically twisted face of the perfect bride. The audio coming through his studio headphones was so crystal clear, it sent a chill down his spine. "My God, what the hell is this?" James stammered. A father's instinct meant he couldn't just sit there. He immediately grabbed his walkie-talkie and yelled on the priority channel. "Thomas, head of security Thomas, drop everything. Get to the control truck right now. Massive emergency. You have to see this immediately before Mr. Sterling signs that death warrant." Meanwhile, out by the fountain, Victor had stepped up to the altar. The sweet sound of violins filled the air. Hundreds of guests stood up in unison, turning their eyes toward the red carpet to await the bride's arrival. Victor stood there, rigid in his tuxedo, but his chest felt impossibly heavy. The absence of his daughter Mia on his happy day was like an unfillable void. He slightly bowed his head, trying to hide the exhaustion in his eyes. And then, his gaze caught a strange object. An autumn breeze swept through the corridor, carrying torn pieces of paper fluttering toward the ceremony area. A piece of paper half the size of a palm landed right on the edge of the red carpet, at Victor's feet. Instinctively, he bent down and picked it up. The billionaire's heart felt as if someone had crushed it in his chest. It was a scrap of a crayon drawing. On it was half the face of the blazing red demon, but this time it was colored with the exact signature bright red lipstick Elena wore, complete with a small mole under the corner of the eye, an unmistakable identifying mark of his fiancée. A 5-year-old child with selective mutism, isolated panic, fiercely scratching at paper every night. Every memory came crashing back like a thunderclap. For the first time, Victor realized he had been deaf and blind to the silent cries for help from his own flesh and blood. This drawing wasn't paranoid jealousy. It was a warning. Right at that moment, a small commotion broke out at the back of the guest seating. Thomas, the head of security, dripping with sweat and breaking all rules of etiquette, shoved his way through the floral barriers and confused VIP guests. Ignoring the wedding planner's desperate attempts to hold him back, Thomas sprinted straight for the altar. He closed in on Victor, his eyes filled with absolute horror, and shoved an iPad and a wireless AirPod forcefully into the billionaire's hands. "Mr. Sterling," Thomas panted, his voice so gravely serious it seemed to freeze the surrounding air. "Don't say anything. You have to watch this right now." The bridal chorus began playing joyously. In the distance, The heavy oak doors swung open, and Elena stepped out into the brilliant light, wearing an angelic smile and waving to the guests. But on the altar, Victor had already put in the earpiece, his eyes locked onto the iPad screen, preparing to face the most brutal truth of his life. The sacred notes of the bridal chorus echoed. The oak doors were wide open, and Elena stepped into the aisle in her pristine white satin dress. The sunlight caught the small diamond tiara on her head, making her look like a flawless angel. Hundreds of guests gasped in admiration, fixing their eyes on the bride gracefully walking forward. But at the altar, Victor wasn't looking at the bride. His eyes were glued to the screen of the iPad that Security Chief Thomas had shoved into his hands, the wireless earpiece transmitting sounds that ripped his soul apart. My wedding, my rules. Do you think drawing this nonsense will make your dad believe you? Your dad would rather believe me than a sick, deaf-mute thing like you. On the high-definition screen, Victor witnessed with his own eyes the demonically contorted face of the woman he was about to marry. He saw the brutal grab of the old nanny's jaw. And most painfully, he saw the wide, tear-flooded eyes of little Mia as her bleeding drawing was ripped to shreds. Rip. The sound of tearing paper rang out with terrifying realism. Victor squeezed his eyes shut. The hand gripping the iPad bulged with green veins. The rage boiling in his blood made his entire body shake. By now, Elena had reached the altar. She smiled coyly, preparing to reach out her hand for Victor to take. But an unforeseen incident occurred. In the mobile control center, Director James was in sheer panic when he saw that Security Chief Thomas had reported to the groom. Yet the wedding was continuing. Looking at the camera feed and seeing the pastor about to speak, James frantically reached for the control lever to disconnect the PA system, intending to run outside and halt the ceremony himself. In his panic, James's elbow slammed hard into the video switcher. That fateful impact rerouted the signal. Instead of disconnecting, the system triggered a full-screen live broadcast command for Camera 7. Outside the aisle, just as the kind-faced pastor smiled and was about to speak, "Welcome to hell, little princess." A sharp, cold, incredibly vicious female voice suddenly blasted through the massive surround sound system of the venue. The symphony music was crushed and completely silenced. Victor jolted and hurriedly pulled out his earpiece. The brutal truth he had just watched privately on the iPad was now being amplified thousands of times over. Everyone's bewildered eyes snapped to the two giant LED screens flanking the aisle, where a romantic video of the couple was supposed to play. On them, in crisp 4K resolution, played the footage of Elena in this exact magnificent wedding dress, gripping the nanny's jaw, snatching the drawing, and cursing at little Mia with the most venomous words imaginable. The entire venue plunged into a deathly silence. Hundreds of VIP guests' jaws dropped. Governors and businessmen sat paralyzed. Sister Sarah shot up from her chair, her eyes blazing, but also filled with vindication, as the demon's mask was finally ripped off for the whole world to see. Elena stood on the altar, her smiling face instantly draining of blood, turning pale as a corpse. The flawless makeup couldn't hide her absolute terror. She frantically backed up, grabbing the lapels of Victor's jacket, and screamed desperately, "Victor, turn it off. This is fake. It's an AI deepfake. Someone is trying to ruin me. You have to believe me." Panicking, Elena lunged toward the pastor, snatching the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a despicable smear campaign." But Victor stepped forward. With a terrifyingly cold composure, he snatched the microphone right out of her hand. Reaching into his breast pocket, Victor slowly pulled out the torn piece of paper he had accidentally found at the edge of the red carpet earlier. The scrap depicting half the face of the blazing red demon. perfectly matching the pieces flying everywhere on the LED screens. Technology can fake images, Victor spoke, his voice low and deep, yet carrying the force of a hurricane sweeping through the venue. But it cannot fake my daughter's bleeding scraps of paper that the wind just blew all the way here. And it certainly cannot fake the absolute evil flowing in your veins. Victor, please. Elena collapsed onto the altar, sobbing uncontrollably, humiliatingly clasping her hands and begging, before hundreds of eyes filled with contempt. Victor looked down straight at his manipulator, enunciating every word. A difficult day doesn't create a person's character, Elena. It reveals it. This wedding is over. The manipulator's final act concluded in utter, crushing humiliation. Seeing Victor turn his back resolutely, Elena frantically reached out to grasp the familiar VIPs in the front row, begging them to speak up for her. But all she received in return were looks of disgust, contempt, and the cold turned backs of the elite. The security team, directed by Thomas, immediately marched onto the altar. Without being overly brutal, but with absolute firmness, they grabbed the almost bride by the arms and dragged her out the side doors. Elena's screams of impotence faded away into silence, leaving her diamond tiara lying abandoned on the red carpet. The crowd quickly dispersed. The expensive jade rose arrangement stood stark and hollow in the empty space, marking the collapse of a theatrical lie. Ignoring all the formalities that followed, Victor ran like a madman toward the west corridor. He found Clara and little Mia huddled together in a hidden corner. Seeing Victor appear with a tear-streaked face, Clara instinctively hugged Mia tight, shielding the child. That defensive reflex felt like a final knife, plunged straight into Victor's conscience. The powerful CEO, who had always prided himself on his sharp judgment, slowly sank to his knees on the marble floor. Mia, Daddy is so sorry, Victor choked out, uncaring about his expensive, dirt-smudged tuxedo. He crawled forward, reaching out to tightly embrace his daughter's trembling little body. His suppression shattered into the desperate, agonizing sobs of a deeply guilty father. Daddy is a terrible person. I left you to suffer that nightmare all alone. I'm sorry for not believing you. He looked up with red, desperate eyes at the nanny. Clara, I owe you an apology and a life. Thank you for using your own body to shield my daughter when I was at my blindest. Clara burst into heavy tears, releasing all the unjust suffering she had bottled up for so long. She gently patted the trembling back of the billionaire. Mia stared blankly at her father's tear-drenched face. Her tiny hand reached out, clumsily wiping a streak of tears from Victor's cheek. No sound was made, but the way she timidly nuzzled her head into his chest spoke of the most boundless forgiveness a child could give her father. 6 months later, the gloomy, freezing atmosphere of the Sterling mansion was a thing of the past. Victor had stepped down as the active CEO, transitioning to chairman of the board so he could spend all his time at home. Sister Sarah had returned, bringing with her infectious laughter and fierce protection. Nanny Clara was now the most powerful head housekeeper of the estate, provided with her own private home and a massive retirement fund. No one lived in fear of threats anymore. But the greatest change was in the room next to the window on the second floor. Victor had personally torn down the dark closets, which had once been Mia's panic hiding spots. In their place was Mia's art studio, flooded with sunlight, featuring oak easels and thousands of boxes of crayons. On a warm weekend afternoon, Victor sat cross-legged on the fleece rug, patiently squeezing out tubes of watercolor. Mia was deeply absorbed in painting a large canvas. On the white paper, there was no trace of the spiky red demon. The new painting was a sun-drenched garden, where a little bird with brilliant feathers perched peacefully on the shoulder of a giant, with a gentle smile. Mia carefully set her brush down. She turned around her large, clear eyes looking at her father, smiling at her. Her tiny hands picked up the painting, and she tiptoed over to place it in Victor's lap. Then, in the peaceful room, where only the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves could be heard, her small lips slightly parted. A very soft sound, timid but incredibly clear, rang out, breaking the ice of 3 agonizing years of silence. "4 for you, Dad." Victor froze. His heart seemed to skip a beat. The painting slipped gently onto the rug as he opened his arms wide, holding his little angel tight, tears of sheer happiness falling silently. A child's bravery had finally triumphed over cruelty, and true love had brought the light back to this home forever.